It's the final game of the 1876 season. Your team battles hard, scoring a field goal, 2 touchdowns, and 2 extra points. Your opponent manages 0 touchdowns and just 4 field goals. On a modern scoreboard, you'd be celebrating a 17-12 victory. Instead, you're walking off the field defeated, because under 1876 rules, your team just lost 3-4. Fast forward 20 years to 1896. You watch a game with the exact same plays. The results? You lose 20-17. 1906, same plays, but now it's a 16-16 tie. 1911, you finally squeeze out a 15-12 win. It took until 1912 for the exact same performance on the field to finally match the 17-12 modern score we know today. The journey to lock in these seemingly arbitrary numbers, 6 for a touchdown, 3 for a field goal, wasn't just a math problem. It took exploited loopholes, a riot of 10,000 angry fans, and a crisis so deadly that the President of the United States had to step in just to keep the sport alive. So why did the sport have to go through an absolute bloodbath just to decide that a touchdown should be worth 6 points? To answer that, we have to look past the modern rulebook and dive into the wild, chaotic evolution of the gridiron, back to a time when football was fighting for its very survival. To understand why our 1876 game ended with the score of 3-4, we have to understand the origins of football in America. The 19th century saw the explosive growth of team sports, especially rugby and association football, or soccer. As the games developed, they also drew inspiration from each other. In fact, an 1869 game between Rutgers University and Princeton is considered to be the very first intercollegiate game of both American football and soccer in America. In this early football match, a point was scored when the ball was either kicked or swatted into the opposing team's goal. When a point was scored, the game concluded, and a new game began. Whoever won the most games out of 10 would be considered the match winner. The final score? 6-4 for Rutgers. But this was before touchdowns, passing, or even carrying the ball with your hands. Those rule changes would bring a much more confusing set of scoring rules, which are the rules our hypothetical 1876 game was played under. Through the early 1870s, there were no standardized rules, with the traveling team generally agreeing to play by whatever rules the home team suggested. Some schools preferred a more soccer-like game, and others preferred a rugby-style approach. To settle this, the Intercollegiate Football Association was formed in 1873 to try and standardize the rules. 3 years of fierce debates and reorganization led to the sport ultimately resembling something closer to rugby, a game where teams would carry the ball down the field in an attempt to kick it through a pair of upright posts. And of course, this included the adoption of the try, or as we more commonly know it, the touchdown. But in the late 1870s, the touchdown wasn't the powerful 6-point score you see today. Back then, a touchdown just granted the team that scored it a free try at a kick. So if your team managed to fight all the way to the end zone, earn the kick, then miss it, you got 0 goals for your hard work. As you can imagine, not everyone thought this was fair. So in 1876, the Rules Committee made a compromise. Anytime the ball was kicked through the goalposts, the kicking team would get a goal. But if your team had a terrible kicker who missed all of his kicks, you could still earn a goal from touchdowns. The catch? You needed to get 4 touchdowns to earn a single goal. That made a field goal 4 times more valuable than a touchdown. And in the event of a tie, goals earned by kicking took precedence. So in our 1876 game, where the score ended 4-3, our 2 touchdowns ultimately added nothing to the score, while the 2 extra points in field goal is what gave us our 3 points. But these early rules had a massive, fatal flaw. Coaches quickly realized that the easiest way to win wasn't to score points. It was to exploit the rulebook. And on Thanksgiving Day in 1881, one specific loophole was abused so badly that it nearly caused a riot of 10,000 fans and forced American football to reinvent itself overnight. Back then, a tense rivalry had emerged between the elite colleges of Yale and Princeton, who were coming into the 1881 game with undefeated records. 10,000 fans were in attendance, each waiting for their favorite team to make a move. And they kept waiting, and waiting, and waiting. This was the infamous block game, known as the slowest game in football history. Neither team wanted to blemish their undefeated record with a loss, as it would surely lead to their opponents being crowned the national champion. But in the early rules of football, there was one quirk that no one accounted for. There was no limit to how long you could maintain possession of the ball. This created a slow, grinding, and incredibly cautious style of play that rewarded the team for not making a move. So for the first half of the game, Princeton just ran the ball in place until they were forced to turn it over for the second half, at which point Yale did the exact same thing for the remainder of the game. Both teams got what they wanted out of it, but no one else did. For the fans, it was an infuriating exercise in futility as they watched the two teams pass the ball among themselves, never approaching the other team for a clash. Instead, they simply ran out the clock, seemingly deaf to the dissatisfied cries from the crowd. For the two teams, a 0-0 tie meant a shared national championship. But for the fans, it was the most boring afternoon of their lives. If coaches were going to just hold the ball hostage, the sport would die before it even got off the ground. How do you force a team to actually play the game? Enter Walter Camp, Yale's football captain, a die-hard enthusiast of the sport and the future father of American football. Camp had studied the rules of football far more intensely than almost anyone else during this era, and at the time was already credited with many of the sport's major changes. In fact, it was his idea to get rid of the chaotic rugby scrum and give one team clear possession of the ball with the snap. But there was a problem. With no requirements to move the ball forward or any limit on downs, there was nothing keeping a team from holding on to the ball for the entire half. The safety was also an issue. If the ball-carrying team touched the ball down in their own end zone, the other team didn't get any points. Instead, the ball-carrying team was rewarded with a safe escape from pressure and a free kick out from their own 25-yard line, hence the name safety. So in the end, Camp got his championship, but he also knew things had to change. Because football was so new, a single individual like Camp could alter the rules of the game and quickly see them gain traction. After the fiasco of the block game, Camp quickly introduced a new scoring system that required teams to play. Initially, a touchdown was 2 points, a kick after a touchdown was 4 points, a field goal 5 points, and a safety 1 point. This penalized teams who abused the safety and further incentivized the touchdown. A few months later, this point system was revised again, upping the safety to 2 points and swapping the values of the touchdown and kick after. So back in our hypothetical 1896 game, we see how the scoring shakes out. Still different from modern scoring standards, but we're getting closer. Camp introduced the concept of down. American football had officially been born. He successfully fixed the block game by forcing teams to move forward. But what Camp didn't realize was that his new rule was a double-edged sword. By forcing teams to gain yards, he didn't just create a faster game. He accidentally created a deadly one. The two teams were now essentially at war with each other, fighting for every single inch of turf. More and more players were being violently injured, and things reached a horrifying tipping point in 1905 when at least 19 players died on the field. The national outrage was so massive that President Theodore Roosevelt personally intervened to stop the bloodshed. The wild story of how that specific crisis forced the invention of the forward pass is a saga all on its own, and I'll link the full video I made about it at the end of this one. But what did it mean for the scoreboard? This crisis meant football was on trial for its life, and it fractured the sport's rulemakers into two warring factions. On one side of the aisle, you had the old-timers, who saw kicking at the heart of the game. All of the running and jockeying for position was to set up the kick. On the other, you had people like Camp, who saw the game as a rugged, strategic game that required brute strength to fight your way into the end zone. Ultimately, it was Camp's side who won out, with changes such as the touchdown no longer needing to be grounded as of 1889, extra point kicks changing from 2 to 1 in 1897, field goals being reduced from 5 to 4 points in 1904, and touchdowns being increased from 4 to 5 points in 1906. It's under these rules that our hypothetical 1906 game ends in a 16-16 tie. But while the sport had just radically legalized the forward pass to save lives, teams hadn't quite figured out how to use it yet. In the aftermath of the deadly 1905 season, the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States was formed, which later became the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA, in 1910. This was soon combined with changes in the Football Rules Committee, which was now part of the NCAA. The old guard was giving way to reformers who had grown up with modern American football, and even old-timers like Walter Camp realized change needed to happen, and what they came up with might as well have been a new game. Legalizing the forward pass changed the entire geometry of the game, spreading players out and finally saving lives. But there was still one glaring issue on the scoreboard. The math was holding the sport back. If the forward pass was the future, why were field goals still deciding the games? Camp and the Rules Committee realized that if they wanted to reward this new, exciting style of offense, they had to make the ultimate prize worth fighting for. If a touchdown was the true mark of a successful team, 5 points wasn't enough. it only took 2 field goals to overpower it. So, in 1912, the touchdown was increased to 6 points, which combined with the point after kick, turned it into the ultimate prize of every scoring drive. So with teams now having 4 downs to score, it allowed for longer strings of strategic play to move the football down the field. Certain key elements of football, like drop-kicking balls mid-play, were phased out. It didn't make sense to kick for 3 if you still had a chance to go for 6. Our 1912 hypothetical game finally resembled modern scoring, but the changes to the scoring system still aren't over. In 1958, college football added the 2-point conversion, with the NFL following suit in 1994. The 1-point safety, which occurs when a team is tackled in their own end zone during a point-after conversion attempt, was added to college football in 1988. In the NFL in 2015. While it has never happened in the NFL, it makes it possible for a team to end a modern game with 1 point. But scorigami will have to be for another video. If you want to see exactly how that 1905 bloodbath forced the invention of the forward pass and brought the President of the United States onto the gridiron, click the video on your screen right now. Thanks for watching.